Good evening, everyone. I'm Ranger Wales, this is Ranger Helminiak, Chris, Nate. Nate and I put this program together a couple years ago because he and I both really enjoy backpacking, and we thought it was a good idea to kind of give everyone an introduction on how to get into this hobby and kind of steer you in the right direction. So that's exactly what we're going to do here tonight. We're just going to take some of our experience and share it with everyone here so that you can go out and you can get hiking. So, you know, anything else you want to add?
No, it's just something I enjoy doing. Certainly, I think we both bring a lot of experience to this, but I am a former Appalachian Trail thru hiker, and I spent some time on the Appalachian Trail working as a ridge runner after that, which is just kind of like a roving park ranger down in Georgia. Worked at a backpacking outfitter gearing people up for hikes on the Appalachian Trail. So just wanted to share a lot of that experience. It's a really good program, I think, for people that are familiar with day hiking and they want to take that next step into backpacking. Just some things to really think about before you get started.
Yeah. And I've been backpacking a couple times, so there we go.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
That's right, that's right. All right, so we might as well get started here. So the biggest thing that you're going to start off with is your preparation and your planning. So this is really where you're going to either have a successful trip or not, is when you're planning things. So you want to figure out how much time you're going to spend out there, the length of the trail you're going to be comfortable in hiking, where you want to go, season you're going to go out there, you're going to check the weather, terrain, the difficulty, and all that stuff. Essentially, you want to have a solid plan going out there. One of the things when I first started backpacking is I would always try to go too far. I would always bring too much stuff, and it would lead to kind of an unpleasant experience. The more experience I got, the better planning I threw out there, and the whole thing just became a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. So these are all things that you're going to want to take into account as you're planning your trip.
Yeah, and I think everyone starts out that way. I know I did the same thing when I first started out backpacking. It was thinking I could go way too far with way too much weight. And I think that's natural, because until you get out there and actually experience what it's like and get comfortable, you feel like you need to pack everything. Just from what I've learned is if you're starting out with backpacking, try to keep it 8 miles or under, unless the terrain is just ridiculously easy, like flat. For something like the Appalachian Trail, if you're going to hop on that carrying 40 pounds, 8 miles turns into a big chore for the day. You might be able to go out and day hike 8 miles easily in 3 hours or even less, but you throw 40 pounds on your back and now you have to worry about getting water and food and things like that. It becomes a real challenge. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Keep those expectations low when you're starting off on that first backpacking trip. You want it to be enjoyable. This is just the starting point. You want to go out and do it again. If it gets too hard that first time, you might turn yourself off from it.
Right. So things that you're going to do before you go out on your trip, and this kind of goes into your planning. You're going to need to let someone know where you're going, when you're going, and when you expect to return. Always tell a family member or a friend back home before you go. That way, if you end up getting lost, they're going to be able to trip that alarm bell. If you're going to a place that has a park office, also check in there and grab your some extra maps and stuff like that, so that the park rangers and so on and so forth are going to know that you're out there and when they expect you back.
Yeah, that's really the best survival thing you can do is before you even go, and this is even for a day hike, is let someone know your itinerary. So if you're not back by a certain time, those red flags go off and they can start that search procedure. It's a lot easier to do that than to learn what kind of plants you can eat and what you can build a shelter out of, and how you can kill a squirrel.
Yeah, well, that stuff's a little more difficult.
I'm going to keep using the Appalachian Trail as a good example. But the Appalachian Trail is a well-known long-distance trail that runs from Georgia to Maine. And they have, at this point, it's been in existence since about 1937. So if that's let's say a long trail that you'd like to do a chunk of, there's lots of information out there. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy, which kind of oversees the maintenance and the upkeep, of the Appalachian Trail puts out a great set of maps and guidebooks. And then there's a lot of other people that put out other kinds of guidebooks, but these are things that will help you plan your trip. It's one thing to calculate distance, but it's another thing to see what kind of terrain you'll be on in that distance. These Appalachian Trail maps are really nice in that they don't just show you where you are on the map, but they also give you a profile map so you know what kind of elevation you're going to be undertaking on a hike like that, and that's kind of nice. This is a picture of Horseshoe Trail, which is close to us. Runs from Valley Forge up to the Appalachian Trail around the area of Harrisburg, about a 140-mile trail that was established roughly the same time, 1937. They're a great organization, put out great maps and guidebook that really tell you almost to the 10th of a mile, you know, where road crossings are, where water is, and that's going to help you plan your trip, especially if it's an overnight hike, because maybe you're going to need to get off the road to go to a store to resupply on food, or you're certainly going to need to know where the water is, because on a backpacking trip you can really only carry about enough water for the day. You're not going to carry water for the whole 3-day trip. So starting out with a good map, guidebook to help you plan the trip is really essential. And now on the internet, of course, a lot of these trails are going to have designated organizations that are going to post information about those trails online too, so information is just easier to come by in that regard.
Yeah. So one thing that I always do when I go on a trip is I make sure I have multiple copies of the map. And I will keep one in my backpack, I'll keep one in my purse at all time, and I always keep them inside like a plastic bag. That way, if it gets lost, you have a backup. If one gets soaked and starts falling apart, you're not kind of walking around blind out in the woods. So this is really the most important thing that you can have with you. If you have your map and your compass, you'll be okay.
And another great tool, which just about everybody has these days, is you can download a lot of maps onto this too. You hate to have to rely on this because you're going to have to charge it, but it's a nice backup. I think it's always great to have an actual tangible paper copy with you, but you know, you could also download a backup on this. You're also going to have a backup compass on this, but wouldn't want to rely on it. This would be my backup.
So what do you mean by data book?
Data books, so say with the Appalachian Trail, what they have are these guidebooks that go into great detail about how the trail is going to be about every 10th of a mile, but then they have this condensed version, much smaller, which they call the data book, which is going to cover in one small book all the way from Georgia to Maine, and it's really just going to list in a kind of one sentence spot what you're hitting. So it really helps you to plan where the campsites are, where the water is, so you can say, oh, okay, with the data book you might have 20 miles right there on one page, you know, shelter, water, road crossing, on and on. So you can go and see, okay, well, it looks like camping is 8 miles away, that's where I'll shoot for the night, and it looks like I can get water again in about 4 miles, so I'm only going to carry 2 quarts of water with me instead of 4. And that's big, because a lot of this you'll find when you start backpacking comes down to how much weight's on your back. A gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. If you can cut that in half, there's 4 pounds. 4 pounds seems light until you have to carry it all on your back for 8 to 15 miles. Then you're going to cut 2 to 4 pounds wherever you can, quick like.
Okay, so gear, this is an important thing, obviously. Nate brought some of his backpacking gear. More than welcome to come up and take a look at it. And you know, he worked in a supplies store, so he'll be able to tell you a whole lot about this. But you really want to have some basics. Clearly, you're going to need to have your backpack, some kind of shelter. You can have a little tent like this. I've used just a cheap hammock and a tarp as a shelter on trips before. It's great. It weighed nothing. It was very comfortable. Sleep system, you're just talking about your sleeping bag, ground cloth to help keep you dry, maybe keep you a little more comfortable. Your layering system, miscellaneous stuff, and water system is going to be very important. This is how you're going to be procuring and filtering all the water on the trail. There's all different ways of doing that, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. And a cook system, Nate likes to use a stove. I use a stove as well. Some people try to cook on a fire when you backpack, and it's a little bit awkward.
Yeah, the thing I'll say about gear is there's really no right or wrong, it's what's right for you. It's trying to find out what the best fit is for you, and there's a lot out there. You could spend $500 or $5,000 on a backpacking setup. And honestly, you know, when I hiked the Appalachian Trail, it was after I graduated school. I didn't have a lot of money to dump into it. So I used it wisely, and I didn't buy top of the line stuff, but everything I bought got me through the trip. You know, and it's a 6-month journey, about a 2,000-mile trip. So I'm a huge advocate of trying to get that as light as possible. I'm a big advocate of, you know, 40 pounds or under for a 3-day trip. I try to get my weight, dry weight they call it, without food and water. I try to get that about 20 pounds. So when I then throw food and water in there for a 3-day trip, I'm still sub 30 pounds. Like I said, about 8 pounds for a gallon of water, but food-wise, you shouldn't be over 2 pounds a day. More like a pound, pound and a half food-wise, because that can really start to add up. And we'll get into a little more specifics about that later. But same with shelter, like Chris said, you know, some people go with a tarp, other people prefer a tent. I prefer a tent because this time of year, you know, you start having the bugs coming out and stuff like that. So I prefer a tent that's fully enclosed that are going to keep these things off me. On the Appalachian Trail, they have shelters set up about every 8 miles. Some people like to rely on that. But how the shelters are is it's kind of first come, first served. You know, so some of these shelters are going to seat about 8, others maybe 16 or more, but you don't know. That could be one Boy Scout troop fills that up. So if you get there, it's raining, you don't have a tent, shelter's full, well, maybe you can hope someone's going to be nice and give you a bunk in there. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. So these are kind of things to consider. And with layering system in here, that refers to your clothing. Clothing-wise, you know, we're trying to stay away from cotton out there because you are going to sweat, it is going to rain. Cotton, like your cotton towel at home that you dry off with after the shower, is going to be great for absorbing water, but it's not great for drying out. And you don't want to carry a lot of that extra weight. Plus, in certain times of year, spring or fall, you get wet, temperatures drop, cotton doesn't dry, now you're going to start looking at problems with hypothermia, things like that. So big advocate of things like wool, synthetics, and again, this is something you don't have to go out and buy a lot of special products, you know, backpacking equipment necessarily, clothing. A lot of this you might already have in workout equipment, Under Armour, things like that. Most of those things are made out of just polyester, and that stuff works fine for backpacking.
Yeah, so one thing that's important while you're packing and you get your clothing in there is you don't need to bring a lot of extra clothing, depending on how long you're going to be out there. Just realize everyone else on the trail is going to be stinky too. So if you're if you're a little dirty and stinky, well, guess what? The other guy's probably going to be worse than you are. One thing that I'll do is I'll bring in a spare set of clothes with me, and I'll leave it back in the car, and I'll leave the deodorant back in the car and all that stuff, because that's going to help you cut weight. And if you're wearing the same pair of socks for a few days, oh well. It's a little uncomfortable, but it's worth the weight savings.
Yeah, and just referring to layering again, it's instead of bringing one big bulky jacket in case it gets really cold, think in layers. Like I'll layer up long underwear, something on top of that, something on top of that. So you're kind of like an onion. You know, you're peeling back layers as you warm up, you're putting those layers back on as you cool down. Yes, sir.
Are you going to talk about the gear, like the tent gear? Is this just for bugs?
It's not just for bugs. It comes with a rain fly, but the rain fly's not on it.
Okay.
So that's a double wall tent, they call it. That initial wall is kind of the screening, but then it has a rain fly, which is the water protection that goes completely over it. This is a single person tent, obviously, but you'll see tents out there that are 2-person, 3-person that don't look much bigger than that. You wonder what kind of people they're using to judge that by. But that's a single person tent, good for 1 person, comes in at about 3.5 pounds. And you know, I like it. It's called freestanding. I don't need to stake it out to make it stand up. That usually makes it a little heavier, but where I'm at now, I still feel comfortable with that weight. But I like the side entrance because I can sit and pivot in easy. Some tents are gonna be more like a doghouse where you zip them open and you're gonna have to crawl in and crawl out. I think this one's a little easier, and plus it gives me enough headroom to sit up in there and actually change. You know, and when weather's bad, when it's raining out, it's nice to have a little room in there to be able to do those things, to try to stay drier.
Thank you.
Okay, so food and water, this is very, very important stuff. So the first thing, your biggest concern, honestly, is gonna be your water supply. There's lots of different ways to do this. Boiling water, you can do it. That means that you either need to have a stove, you need to have a container to put your water in. You just need to bring that water to a boil, and then after that, it's considered treated, but it's not gonna taste very good, and it's gonna be very time consuming to do that. Filter, that's usually the way I go. Nate, I think, has one with him. And he'll break that up, we'll talk about that.
This is if you're just taking water from a stream.
Yes,
We're talking about
yeah.
that.
And then you can also use chemical treatments. This is probably the most lightweight way of doing this. You take an iodine tablet, chuck it in there, and it will purify your water for you. It's gonna taste awful, so you can throw something like a lifesaver in there to bring a little flavor back. But I use a filter. I know Nate uses a filter here, and he can tell you about his setup.
Yeah, with water treatment, you obviously can boil it. That's gonna treat it, bring it to a boil. But it's not real efficient because now you're gonna have to carry extra weight and fuel to try to heat that up, or rely on building a campfire, which takes time and needs dry wood. So I prefer a pump. And if you're going on a multiple day backpacking trip, you're just not gonna carry all that water with you. You're gonna have to rely on water sources out there. If you get on, you know, trail like the Appalachian Trail, a lot of these are gonna be higher sources, they're gonna be springs, they're gonna be good sources, but you still don't know what might have happened in that water source before you got there, who maybe, you know, used the bathroom and then washed their hands in that nice spring. You don't know what's in there, so you have to treat it just to be safe. I prefer a filter. I can drop it in the water source, pump it out. I also prefer hydration bags like this because it keeps that bite valve right on my shoulder. It reminds me to keep drinking, to stay hydrated. If you're backpacking and your pack weighs 40, 50 pounds, you don't feel like taking that off every time you want to drink, and it's real hard to reach around to those bottles. So I like to have that hydration hose, which is right on my shoulder. I can drink from that, and how I have my setup with my filter is I can actually pull that bite valve right off, and I can pump my water right into it. So I maintain the ability to carry a gallon of water, but I very rarely do. But it all depends on that guidebook or data book, what it's telling me. How far to my next water source? If I know I'm hiking about 2 miles an hour and the next water source is 6 miles out, well, I'll be there in probably about 3 hours, so I'll carry enough water to get me to that point.
Yeah, it's just important to keep in mind that while you're out on the trail, just keep drinking as much as you need. By the time you start feeling thirsty, that means you're already getting dehydrated. And if you lose this stuff, if you lose your iodine tablets, it's better to drink water and get sick later than not to drink water out of the trail, because that's when bad things can happen. Next thing, which is pretty important too, is food. You're going to be blowing through a lot of calories while you're out on the trail, so you have to be pretty well prepared. You're going to want to bring things that are durable and portable. So a lot of the stuff that we have in this picture is stuff that you can just go to the grocery store. You don't need to go out and buy the expensive mountain house meals where you just boil a little bit of water, you pour it in there, and you have like a lasagna. They're expensive, but you can go buy a packet of ramen and essentially have the same thing, and it's going to be lightweight. The big mistake people make when they're packing food is they're like, a can of tuna, that's brilliant. I'm going to bring that. Well, guess what? Cans of tuna weigh a lot because they're in a metal can. Don't ever, ever, ever take cans. You can go buy those little packets of tuna in the like foil container. It's just as good. But always pack a little more food than you think you're going to need, because you don't want to run out on the trail, and you don't ever want to have to try and rely on wild harvesting or starving yourself while you're out there. So just bring a little bit extra.
Yeah, I like this picture because it gives a good example of the things that you'll find in a typical backpacker's food bag. The Mountain House meals, like the lasagna Chris was talking about, are great, but they can be expensive, between $6 and $8 a meal. I love getting by on ramen noodles, pouches of tuna for supper, Pop-Tarts for breakfast. I've even kind of whittled it down to the point where, you know, I try to minimize how much I need to cook. That minimizes how much fuel I need to carry. So I like things that are ready-made to eat like that, the Pop-Tarts, the granola bars, the dehydrated fruit, stuff like that, bagels, cheese sticks. Cheese actually, even in warm weather in the summer, it holds up for a while. So, good examples, and yeah, stay away from the cans. You gotta think about it with your garbage too, that you're gonna have this garbage, and you're gonna have to pack that out with you too. That's the best practice. So, taking in cans is more weight to pack out than foil pouches. One of the best things that ever happened to meat products, in my opinion. You can get tuna, Spam, all that good stuff in a foil pouch now. It's so much less garbage to have to deal with.
These energy bars, you recommend those, or?
I'm a big fan of Cliff bars, but I just as much enjoy the Nature Valley bars too. So, you know, some of those energy bars can get a little expensive, but you know, you can get by with the Nature Valley bars too. It really depends on what you like. I kind of eat like a backpacker every day anyway. I eat a lot of bars, so I typically just raid my cupboards when I'm going out on a backpacking trip. And yeah, I still eat ramen noodles even after college, and eat them on a pretty daily basis, so I'm used to those meals.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those little Lipton instant side dishes. You go out and you get packs of the noodles and potatoes and stuff like that, and it's just easy. You throw a little bit of water in there and you got a nice meal.
Instant.
And with nothing.
Yeah, instant potatoes. I mean, it's nice to have stuff where you can heat up a little water and add it to it, and that makes cleanup a lot easier too at the end of the night. I don't carry much. My stove and my cook pot are right in here. I try to go pretty minimal, so I just burn some denatured alcohol, which is enough to heat up water really, and then I combine that with, you know, my ramen noodles, which doesn't take a lot to hydrate. So, you know, I really try to simplify when I'm out there. With gear, there's so many different stoves and different ways to go, but definitely a stove I think is the way to go. You don't want to have to rely on building a fire, because if you're out for a week like this, you're going to have a real hard time finding dry wood and getting that fire started. If you were depending on that to heat up everything and eat off of, you're going to be in some trouble.
Yeah.
It's going to be much more of a challenge anyway, we'll put it that way.
So I worked in a military base out in the Mojave Desert, and we would find MREs all the time, and we would use those on our backpacking trips on the Pacific Crest Trail. And they were nice because you didn't need to bring anything. You broke this little chemical stick in half, you poured a little water in there, and you threw chemicals in there and actually cooked the meal for you. To buy those, they're higher end, they're going to be more expensive, but they got everything you need. You don't have to carry stoves. So it just all depends on your taste and what's available to you.
Yes.
Can you just break out that stove? Can I just see it? I mean, when
Sure.
you said something about denatured alcohol, I don't know what that is, so I'd love to see what that's about.
It's they call it that. If you get on like websites or backpacking forums, people might refer to them as a cat can stove or something like that. But denatured alcohol it's an alcohol that you would find in a hardware store, and it's just gives off a good amount of BTUs. And it's as simple as just taking some of that denatured alcohol, and I carry it just in a smaller plastic bottle, and I'm probably using about an ounce of that denatured alcohol to heat up this, which is just shy of a quart.
Okay.
And it's not going to get to a rolling boil, but it's going to get warm enough to soften up some noodles, like some Lipton noodles, mac and cheese, or ramen noodles. It's going to work perfect for that. Now, a lot of stoves out there that people are using for backpacking nowadays are kind of these isobutane that run off of canisters, like Jet Boils, MSR stoves. They're real nice. They're real easy too, but they're a little bigger. They're a little bulkier.
What about like a can of Sterno? Can you use that?
You can use that. Sterno is a little heavy. If you were thinking of that, another solid fuel is Esbit. It's called Esbit tablets, and you can use them too. And it's just a solid fuel. They're kind of nice and light, but Sternos can get a little heavy, but you can use them.
Yeah.
I would almost think if you're thinking that sterno direction, check out denatured alcohol. Do a search on them, you know, denatured alcohol stoves. They're real simple, you can make your own. But if you're going out, it's good for one person. If you're going out with a group
Gosh, I'm so sorry.
and heating up water for a bigger feast, that's when you probably won't like them. That's when you're gonna want the white gas stove or the isobutane type stoves. This is kind of a one-person setup I have. It's much different when I go out with my wife and our 5-year-old boy. I'm carrying a lot more weight then.
Right. Is another reason to keep it simple on the first
Yeah,
couple
definitely.
trips, because you're gonna find all this stuff out pretty quickly when you're on the trip.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So yeah, before you go, just kind of do a little bit of homework before you set on your trip. Trail closures happens all the time. You know, it can really put a kink in your plans, and you know, you need to be aware of that. Hunting season, there's almost always some kind of hunting going on. So depending on where you're going, make sure that there's not gonna be dudes running around with guns in the woods.
Or if there is, you have enough orange on so
Yeah.
they know you're not a bear or a deer.
Exactly, because weird things happen. Environmental concerns, essentially, the kind of habitat that you're going into, is it gonna be dry, is there gonna be water available, the kind of flora and fauna you might be running into, any weather that might be blowing through, these are all things that you're gonna wanna do some homework on before you go out. And then leave no trace, I'm gonna leave that one to Nate, because he knows a thing or two about it.
Leave no trace are things we kind of touched on. They're just principles for minimizing your impact while you're out there. There's 7 principles of leave no trace that cover everything from where to, you know, walk on durable surfaces, minimizing campfire impact, respecting wildlife. But I have hang tags up here. If you're seriously getting into backpacking or into it, even hiking, please take one. The white ones are more adult-oriented, kind of backpacking. The yellow ones are for the younger crowd, a little more fun. But things as far as, you know, taking a camp stove, not relying on fire, treating your water so you don't get sick and need rescue, things like that really hit that leave no trace note. And environmental concerns around here, the first one that comes to mind for me is ticks. If you hike somewhere in Chester County, you just always have to be mindful of ticks, how to try to prevent them and checking yourself good when you're done. In other areas of the state, you go north, hiking trails like West Rim, Black Forest, bears. Bears now become a concern. What are you gonna do with your food? When you camp at night, you're gonna have to hang it, put it somewhere. You don't want it right next to you, or bears might come next to you. So those are part of that environmental concerns
Do
too.
you carry a bear spray?
I personally do not, because I found if you take enough precautions, like hanging your food, bear bagging your food away from you, that's a good enough deterrent. When I worked on the Appalachian Trail, a lot of people would carry bear spray. It's called a counter assault, I think, and a lot of people would have it, and it would be buried all the way in the bottom of their backpack. So if they came into an incident where they actually needed it, they'd have to stop, pull everything out of their backpack, tell the bear to wait, you know, until they grab their spray. So it ended up just being dead weight in a lot of people's packs. I think if you take the right precautions and know how to be bear aware, you can kind of forgo the guns and the bear spray and other things like that.
Black bear are the kind of bears we're gonna run into in Pennsylvania. They're naturally pretty shy around human beings. Gotta remember that there's a hunting season every year where people go out and harvest bears, and they're aware of that. As long as you're smart about it, you make plenty of noise as you're walking through the woods, and you keep all your food and all your good smelly stuff up in a tree, you're not gonna run into bears. I've seen a grand total of 1 bear in all my backpacking experiences, and I know they're around, but they just see you and smell you, and they take off. They have a better sense of smell than a dog does, so they know that you're there.
Yeah, I think most bear experiences in Pennsylvania are gonna be like that. I mean, on the Appalachian Trail, around these shelters, they even have devices, bear cable systems, or boxes to put your food in there, just to make it a little harder for the bears to get to. And some of these places, they do unfortunately get bear problems where the bear loses that fear and it knows to come into a shelter because it's found food there before. So it's definitely something to be mindful of, but I don't think you need to be overly concerned about it. If you know what you're getting into and how to kind of deter the bear, you should be fine in most situations.
And we'll talk about critters a little bit more later in the thing. And obviously, we already touched on this, and it's something that we're gonna stress again and again. Make sure you're leaving the itinerary with your family and friends and at the park office if you can.
Yeah, and trail closures, here's something that's interesting, on the Horseshoe Trail website lately, I noticed with pipeline construction, you know, this basically, people would come up to a section of the trail where they were running the pipeline through there, so it essentially shut down the trail. So for a local trail like the Horseshoe Trail, that happens a lot. That happens a lot. So it's good to go to the website and just see what those updates are.
All right, skills, physical fitness. So this is really kind of a good place to start. You're going to find out that that 40-pound pack on your back is going to put a lot of stress on your body. But if you take some time to get used to wearing that pack and hiking, you'll be all right. So get in shape and go out and do day hikes with your pack set up. People do this at Warwick all the time because the Horseshoe Trail does actually run through the entire length of our park. So they'll come out there, they'll test out their setup, and they'll just get their bodies used to getting out on the trail and moving. Make sure that you're also taking into consideration any medical conditions that you may have. Bring your medications, be prepared for any type of situation you might run into from a pre-existing condition.
Yeah, I call those things shakedown hikes. You know, before you go on a backpacking trip, it's nice to know how to work all those straps on your backpack. Get it on, get it full of that weight you're gonna carry, get used to that. Get used to setting up your tent, get used to how your stove works. You don't wanna try to figure all this out on your first night out on the trail because you're gonna be hungry, thirsty, potentially cold, wet, miserable. You wanna know how to use all these things before you get out there, and you wanna know how they feel. You want to break your boots in. You want to know how they fit. Are they going to give you a blister? You know, you want to try to deal with those problems before you take that big 3 to 5 day trip you've been planning on, because you want that trip to be as enjoyable as you can. And the more shakedown hikes you do like that, you can start to kind of whittle out, well, maybe I don't need this, or maybe I can save a few pounds or ounces here. So it's really good for kind of honing your skills before you get out there for the big test.
Yeah, it's a nice little test run before your hike. Okay, so navigation. This is an important thing. So first things first, we already kind of touched on this. Make sure you have a map. Make sure you have that compass. Double up on both if you can, because if you have something like a GPS, that's great and it can make life a lot easier for you. But the thing is, they rely on batteries, and batteries die. And electronics can break down in bad weather, so on and so forth. So if you're just using that GPS unit, you could find yourself in a little bit of trouble. So make sure that you have that map. I have a GPS unit, and I spent a good amount of money on it about 10 years ago or so. And I brought it out on a backpacking trip, and it found its way back in my pack, and I never brought it out again because it was too difficult to read, and it just wasn't all that accurate, and I just ended up using my map and compass, and I don't think I'll ever use a GPS again for a backpacking trip. Orienteering, that is the skill where you can read a map and a compass, and you'll be able to forge your own path through whatever natural area you're in. Most of these maps that you'll be using, you're not going to have to use orienteering. There's going to be a set path laid out for you. There's going to be blazes on the trail. And really what you'll probably be using your compass for most is just orienting the map, so finding north, south, east, and west. Something else that you can use is the terrain and the natural features to help orient yourself. So one of the examples I use at Warwick is all our ridges run east to west. So in the park, you know, if you're walking uphill, you're heading south. If you're walking downhill, you're heading north. So that's the kind of thing that you're going to be conscious of while you're out hiking and navigating through the forest or wherever you may be, is what is the terrain telling me about what direction I'm heading. Obviously, you can use the sun to help you navigate as well, but an issue that you can run into with stuff like that is it's called green out. And this time of year, all the trees leaf out. You might not be able to see the position of the sun. You may not be able to see some of those natural features quite as well, but it is a useful tool. Another skill that I've used is called dead reckoning. If you are orienting yourself and you come into an obstacle like here in our picture, this guy wants to walk to the mountain, he sights the mountain, he orients himself to it, and then he hits this river here. So what he's going to do is just count his steps, 15 steps over, 50 steps over, 15 up, and then 65 back to his normal direction. If you don't have a map and compass, you've lost your stuff, your GPS has died, you can use a different kind of dead reckoning, which is sighting that mountain in the distance and then lining up a feature in front of you, like a tree, and then you walk straight to that tree. When you get to that tree, you line up a second object in the distance that is in line with that mountain, and you keep walking. And that way you can go on a pretty much a straight line. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to start meandering around, and before you know it, you're not going to see the mountain. You're going to be like, oh boy, this is a problem. But what I would do is, if you're going out on your shakedown hikes, take your map and compass with you and start learning how to orient it. It's not a difficult skill. You'll be able to pick it up. All you need to do is find north. But when you're out on the trail, like Nate's saying, you might be a little tired, a little sore while you're out there. So it's a good skill to be able to just do it without having to think about it. So.
Yeah, it's good to know how to orient a map, how to use a map and compass, but it's not absolutely essential for going out on a backpacking trip. Trails like the Appalachian Trail are so well marked and established, and they're marked with a white blaze, which is, like a 2x6 stripe marked on trees. And if you're standing in one blaze at a tree, you should be able to look ahead and see the next blaze. The Appalachian Trail is kind of like the pinnacle of that, but a lot of other trails are like that too. Horseshoe Trail through Warwick County Park, you'd have a hard time getting off that trail. It's marked with a yellow blaze. So a lot of trails like that are very well established. You can follow the blazes and you'll be fine. But if you get in an emergency situation or you need to deviate off trail, it's certainly nice to have a map and to know how to read it and to have a compass to help direct you if need be. But it's not something you'll probably be relying on the whole time you're on a well-established trail. It's probably something you pull out every now and again just to kind of check, see where you think you are on the map. But you're not going to be walking and checking this thing every 5 minutes.
No, usually if I stop to get a drink of water, get a snack, I'll always break my map out and just kind of get an idea where I am. Another good thing to do is just kind of get an idea of what your pace is as you're walking, because you don't have a real good way of tracking your distance. You can do it using dead reckoning. That means you're having to constantly be counting your steps and so on and so forth. So if you know you walk roughly, say 3 miles an hour, you can use that as a rough guide. But that's another thing you can do on your shakedown hike is you're going to be walking a little slower with that 40 pounds on your back. So once you get to understand what your pace is, you'll be able to get a better idea how much distance you're actually covering.
Yeah, not all trails are well marked.
That's right, that's right.
No, even though, say, the Horseshoe Trail through French Creek State Park,
Yeah.
it shares footbed with a lot of other trails that go through there, like Boone Trail and some other ones. So now you get on those trails, the yellow blazes disappear, you're following blue blazes. So it's nice to have a map to know when you're hooking up with those other trails.
And in the fall, it's hard when you got leaves all over everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Mhm.
the trail isn't obvious.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and then you get to a place like the Appalachian Trail up in New Hampshire. It's a totally different game up there. You get above tree line, now you have these rock piles, rock cairns that mark the trail, but they're not necessarily blazed. And the Appalachian Trail follows a bunch of different older trails, so you really have to rely on that map more.
Yeah, you need a map.
Indeed you do. All right, so fire. I know Nate doesn't always have a fire. I usually do when I'm out there. But this is a skill that you don't want to have to develop while you're out on your first backpacking trip, because it could be a little difficult. So learn how to build a fire, and it's not really that hard. It can just be difficult. And also understand that you're going to get to your campsite and you're going to be tired from hiking all day. That means you got to put your camp up, and then you got to start going and collecting wood. So this is something you have to really think about. Do you want to do it? You don't want to have to depend on it at all. And if you're going to do it, you're going to use some leave no trace principles while you're having your fire. But what I generally will do is I'll take some paper towels and I'll put some vegetable oil on them, and I'll keep them in a plastic bag. It weighs next to nothing, and it's the best fire starter ever. Another thing that I've used is, if I'm using my chainsaw, all the sawdust that comes out of that chainsaw is soaked in oil, and it weighs nothing, and that's a great fire starter as well. But the best thing to do is just bring a couple Bic lighters with you. They're durable, they're cheap, they don't weigh much, and it's an easy way to start a fire. Don't try to think you're gonna go out and start it with a bow drill or flint and steel or anything like that, because you're gonna be cold and wet and hungry. So just come well prepared and really build that skill up before you go out on the trail. Build fire ring if there isn't one existing. A lot of camps will have a fire ring there for you, and this is the most important thing, is just make sure that is out, completely extinguished before you leave that camp. It should be soaked to the bone. There should be no smoke, no heat. You should be able to touch the ash. Otherwise you can burn stuff down, and that's not generally a good thing.
Do you take a shovel?
I usually don't take a shovel.
I don't take a shovel either. If I do take a shovel, I used to take a shovel, and that shovel was primarily for digging a cat hole to go number 2 in when I was out there. It wasn't for digging in kind of a fire pit. What I found on a lot of these more popular trails where most people are probably gonna start out backpacking is they have established fire rings already set up. So it's something you're not even gonna have to worry about building a fire ring. It's already gonna be established, and which is good. Because once you build a fire ring, you burn some wood in there, it's gonna scar the rock, it's gonna scar the ground. You don't wanna build a bunch of fire rings in an area because it starts to look polluted, essentially. And so use the fire rings that are already there. Most established campsites along popular trails are gonna have them. But if you are somewhere and you need to, it's a great idea to build a fire ring. You know, get rid of that debris around that would catch fire, leaves, and build that fire ring to help contain the fire. It's definitely, I love fires, I just don't always get to them while I'm backpacking. They come in real handy. Like Chris was saying, another trick is cotton balls soaked in Vaseline. If you're dealing with wet wood, that's a nice fire starter too. Because if you work at it hard enough, you can usually get some dry wood, get something going. If it's rainy like this is a great time to be able to try to get a fire started, try to dry some of your things when you're at camp.
You guys carry a small hatchet with you then?
I do from time to time.
I don't, for multiple reasons, mostly because of weight. But most of the time out there, there's gonna be available dead and down wood. And what you're really looking to find is stuff that's probably no bigger than your wrist, that you can break, you know, over your knee or by hand. And what's nice about using wood that's smaller like that too, is it's gonna burn up overnight. So you're gonna have less fire to try to extinguish in the morning. Because you might be at a dry camp, a place that doesn't have water. So if you need to use your water now to extinguish the fire, now, well, how many more miles is it gonna be till you find more water? So you gotta have to make that decision.
Yeah. Another important point about leaving no trace stuff is don't go collecting stuff off of trees. Even if there's dead limbs, you leave it where it is. Pick up stuff that's laying on the ground. Another thing is green wood doesn't burn very well, and if it does, it pops and smolders. So, yeah, you're not going to have too much a need for it. And I do have a small hatchet that I'll take from time to time, but what makes me nervous about that is if I'm out in the woods, especially by myself, and I slip and I hit myself, then I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. So, if anything, I will always carry my little pruning saw and like a multi-tool, and that's about it.
Yeah. What you will find on trails like the Appalachian Trail around these shelters that are popular campsites is a lot of that dead and down wood does get gathered up around these areas. You usually make out a little better in those kind of off the beaten path campsites on the trail away from the shelters. They usually have a better supply of dead and down wood that you can gather from.
Yeah, one thing I'll do is if it is an established campsite, is I'll leave a courtesy pile. Whatever I don't use, I'll leave for the next people, and you'll probably find that from time to time as well.
But Chris is dead on with the bit too. Don't mess with waterproof matches, or it's just aggravating and frustrating. Having a lighter and keeping it dry, carry it back up, you'll be fine.
Yeah. All right, shelter. So we already talked a little bit about the tent. And again, this I think is something that's going to be a personal preference for you. If you start shopping for gear, you're going to see lots of different tent systems. Like this is kind of the setup that I've used in the past with the hammock and the tarp. It wasn't even that fancy, but it was comfortable and it wasn't too buggy at the time. But you are able to buy little hammock tents that are enclosed, so you can just hang the hammock and you're not going to have bugs getting in on you. A lot of people, sometimes people think they're going to build Don't try to build anything while you're out there. If it's an absolute necessity, you can wing it. You can cover yourself in leaves or pine needles or something like that. It'll keep you warm and fairly dry. But have something that you're going to be comfortable in because you're going to be sore enough. You don't need to be sleeping on the ground like that. The really important thing is where to set up. We've all been burned by this in the past. I got this picture here of the river because you can build up a campsite near the river. It's great. There's your water source right there. You don't have to walk very far. But then you get some rain blow through in the middle of the night. Next thing you know, your tent's in the river and you're nice and wet and scrambling to get all your stuff out there. So you're going to look for a pretty relatively dry, flat spot that's close to your water source, but not on your water source. Another thing that you're going to look for when you go to set up is if you're in the forest, you look up and see if you have any dead trees or limbs nearby because those things will fall on you in the middle of the night. That's why they're called widowmakers. I had a giant box elder almost break and fall onto my tent. My tent was here, the tree fell here, and I had a big thunderstorm blow through. The thing must have been struck by lightning a long time ago. It had a crack in it. It's the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was terrifying. But I did take that step of looking and seeing if it was a damaged tree or not, and I got lucky. And again, we kind of touched on this, security, food, and water. This is a really important thing. So it's not just bears you have to worry about. Bears are big and scary, but there's other critters that are going to come in and try to take your food. They're trying to get into anything that's sticky. Toothpaste, if you have it, deodorant, chewing gum, anything like that. These critters will smell it and they'll try to get into it. So don't keep any of that stuff in your tent or near your campsite. So what you're going to do is, generally, bless you, you're going to construct a bear bag, which can be as simple as tying a rock to a piece of rope, getting one of your stuff sacks, putting all that stinky stuff in there, chucking it up over those branches and pulling it up and tying it off. I know Nate's got a pretty spiffy system that he set up in his time out on the trail, which is a little more elegant than the way I do it. But they both work, and again, this is one of those things that as you're out on the trail, you're going to find out what works best for you.
Yeah, that's an example of a bear bag down here, this picture, and that's about a perfect bear bag because you can see in relation to the person, it's high enough if you were in bear country that a bear couldn't reach it. It's on small enough limbs so the bear wouldn't climb out there to get it. But almost any established campsite you get to, I can almost guarantee you it's going to have mice. And those mice are going to be your biggest problem. You know, especially if you're setting food right outside your tent, they're going to get to it. If you have food right inside your tent that's open, they're going to chew through your tent to get to it. So you're going to be dealing with some sort of critter. It might not be a bear, but it could be a mouse.
Yeah, raccoons are very friendly.
Yeah.
Another important thing to point out at this point is don't cook in your camp because the residual smell will be there and the critter's going to come and check it out. You might spill some food while you're cooking. So maybe give yourself some distance from where you cook your meal and eat it to where your camp is, where you're going to sleep at night.
Yeah, kind of think of a triangle. You know, one point of that triangle is going to be where you're camping for the night. Other point is going to be where your cook station is, and the other point is going to be where you're actually storing your food. Try to create a separation there.
All right, terrain. This is pretty important because that's an unpleasant hike to have to make. I ran into something like that when I was down in West Virginia hiking. You could reach out and lean on the side of the mountain. So we got whipped into shape real quick, but again, this is one of those things that you want to do your homework on before you get down there. You don't want to be surprised by something like that. So first thing is, what kind of ecosystem are you going into? Is it going to be eastern forest? Are you going to be out west in the desert? That way you can prepare yourself physically and make sure that you have all the gear that you need to overcome that. Another dangerous thing is crossing waterways. It's one of those things that if you can avoid doing it, avoid it. You know, if it's a little stream that you can just walk through, it's probably okay. But if it's a substantial body of water, it doesn't take much to whip you off your feet, and you've got 40 plus pounds on your back, which is going to throw you off a little bit. So take your time. If you have to, use a pole to help ford across, or find a bridge. And just obstacles. What I was always taught was if you can go around it, go around it. Don't step over it, because if you're even trying to just crawl up over a log, you can fall and snap your ankle and you're going to have a problem. If you just walk around it, you're going to avoid that. It's a couple extra steps. It's worth that precaution.
Yeah, even on, I mean, you don't have to be on an Alaskan expedition to have to worry about water crossings. Even in Warwick County Park, we have a section on the Horseshoe Trail where you need to cross over the south branch of French Creek. And, you know, usually it's not too formidable, but weather like this, water comes up, you can get in trouble. So it's a good idea, take your backpack, unbuckle things just in case when you're crossing that water, if you do fall in, that your pack's not weighing you down, that you can wiggle out of your pack and get away. So you just have to start thinking about those things. And it's good to know that it's good to study, like we talked about previously, before you get in that situation, to know that you might face that. Because otherwise, you know, that might be a point where you look at that and you're like, well, now I have to turn around and I'm 3-4 miles deep in the woods because I don't want to cross this. So it's nice to know if you're coming upon any of that.
Right. I think kind of the take-home message for this one is move slowly while you're out backpacking. I mean, it's not a race, and if you're moving slow, you're going to take your time, you're going to think about what you're doing, you're going to save yourself some energy, you're going to enjoy yourself a little bit more, and you're going to avoid having those accidents. You're going to stop and think about what you're going to do before you do it. It's not a race. One thing I know I've fallen into many times is when I'm planning out my trip, I want to start here and I want to end at this campsite that day. And something happens. The terrain's a little rockier than I thought. I get a cramp, I get to sit down, I had to spend a little extra time looking for water, and before you know it, you're having to kind of rush yourself to try to get to that end point. Don't rush. You know, find another campsite, camp there, take your time. There's no rush when you're out there. All right, plants and wildlife. So this is kind of what everyone imagines is going to happen when you get out in the woods. These little guys are hiding around every corner, and mushrooms, that just looked really poisonous, so that's why we put that in there. And then everyone's best friend, poison ivy. Truth be told, here in Pennsylvania, there's not a whole lot to worry about critter-wise. There's no grizzly bears, there's no polar bears. We have black bears. Again, we kind of treaded that ground. They're pretty shy. The most dangerous large animal in Pennsylvania is the white-tailed deer, because people get into car accidents with it, and that's what produces the most fatalities. But again, depending on where you're going, you might not be going to Pennsylvania. If you're going out to somewhere like the Mojave or Alaska, you might run into some critters that you need to be aware of, learn their natural history, just so you kind of know how to avoid them, how to interact with them if you have to.
Time of year is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just be aware of that habitat that you're going into. Venomous snakes, everyone's terrified of them. As park rangers, we will tell you that every snake in Pennsylvania is a copperhead. According to people that we talk to out on the trails every day, every snake is a copperhead. I'm pretty sure someone has thought a cat is a copperhead. I've never seen a copperhead around here. It doesn't mean they're not around, but they're not super common. We do have 3 species of venomous snakes in Pennsylvania: the copperhead, the it's the timber rattler, and something called the masa agua. It's out west. It's a rattlesnake, and it's endangered, so you're probably not going to run into it. But generally, all these snakes are pit vipers. The 2 rattlesnakes clearly have a rattle on their tail, and the copperhead, well, he doesn't have a rattle on his tail. He'll flick his tail on the ground and let you know that he doesn't want you to come anywhere near him. They're all very shy. Snakes are fragile animals. They don't want to be touched. They don't want to have to struggle at all because they're pretty brittle. It's important to know where their habitat is. These snakes that we have in this area and up in the Poconos, they like rocky areas that are drier. A lot of people think you're going to find copperheads in swamps. It's not all that common. So they're going to be in areas called talus slides. So if you ever drive up in the mountains, you'll see these big shale slides on the sides of the mountains. That's where these guys are going to be living, because they're hunting things like rodents and insects, and that's where the rodents and insects live. So when you're out in the woods, it's a good idea to not reach under rocks, reach into rotting logs, because that's where the little stinky, nasty things are. One thing that you can do is, if you're in an area that does have venomous snakes, or something like scorpions, which is something I ran out to in the desert a lot, just make sure that you're checking your sleeping bag before you get in. Either leave your boots on at night, or make sure that you're checking them when you get up in the morning, because they'll go to a nice warm, damp spot to den up for the day, because most of them are nocturnal. And just be aware that they're around. Really, my biggest concern when I'm out in Pennsylvania is bees and wasps. That's probably what you're gonna run into. I've gotten stung out on the trail before, and it's not great, but that's why I bring Benadryl with me. And, you know, again, don't be cramming your hands in rotten logs. Poisonous mushrooms and plants. This is a reason that unless you know what you're doing, don't eat any wild plants. I know enough where I'd probably be okay, but I wouldn't have to depend on it, and I wouldn't eat anything I wasn't familiar with. And poison ivy, just don't stick your face in it. All right, like, because that's just a bad idea.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it is, and you know, poison ivy, everyone tells you it leaves a 3, let it be. It's got the waxy coating on it. Really, the best way to tell if something's poison ivy is you see this big hairy vine on a tree. Again, don't put your face in it because it's going to be unpleasant. But really, the key to interacting with wildlife and plant life is just be respectful of it. One of the leave no trace concepts is the rule of thumb. If you can hold your thumb up and cover an animal and you can't see it, you're at a respectful distance. If you do that, you can still see the animal, you're too close. So just leave the wildlife be. Don't go picking up any like cute little critters that you may find, frogs, toads, because they can have toxic materials on their skins that they use to defend themselves, and you're eating later, you get sick, and you're just stressing out the wildlife. So just let it be, watch it, and enjoy it.
Yeah, in the southeast here, I think your biggest concerns are poison ivy, ticks, and yellow jackets, things to be concerned with. Now, if you go up, say, Appalachian Trail around the Port Clinton area, you're going to get into some higher areas, higher rocky outcroppings where you may start to run into some copperheads, even rattlesnakes, but around here, not so much. So pretty safe hiking here in the southeast.
Yeah, you'll be all right.
As long as you can identify a deer tick and poison ivy, you should be in good shape. Weather challenges, this changes throughout the year, knowing what you might encounter. We just got over some rough winter, but coming up in summer, I think, warmer weather, what you have to start to be concerned with now is thinking about water out on the trail it's hard to believe now, but later in summer, June, July, August, especially August, September, things start to dry up, water supplies might become more of a problem. Hurricane season, hurricanes coming in, heavy rains like that, and that's part of that plan ahead and prepare, kind of knowing what time of year you're doing it. You were talking about maybe the Appalachian Trail, Virginia, in August, that time of year. Yeah, just being mindful of, what kind of the weather patterns have been, what's going on with hurricanes, high winds, heavy rains, things like that can get you in trouble. So having a plan to stay dry, putting that faith in your shelter, having a good shelter that you know is waterproof, knowing how to set it up properly in bad conditions to keep you dry is going to go a long way depending on the weather. And I think when most people start out backpacking, they're probably going to do it in late spring, summer, early fall, when you have the least chance of getting in trouble by weather. But as you gain those skills, you're going to start to test those boundaries a little bit, because it's nice to go out in cooler temperatures because you don't have to put up with the bugs, you don't have to put up with the heat, and there's typically a lot less people out there if you're looking for solitude.
All right, getting lost. This can happen. Again, we've been telling you, most of these trails are going to be really well blazed. You're going to have your map, but sometimes things happen. You might wander off the trail to use the bathroom, and you turn around and you realize I really don't know which direction I came from. So the best thing you can do is just stay calm. If you realize that you've lost you're disoriented, just stop. And something I've done is I'll lay like a stick down in front of me so I know which direction I was facing when I was walking in. Because if you start turning around and looking, you're not going to remember which way you walked in. If you can do that, you can just turn around and backtrack out of there. If you're really lost, it's a good idea to kind of stay put for a while. That way, you might have people coming and looking for you. If you start booking blindly through the woods, you're going to just get more and more lost as you go. You can try signaling for help, starting a fire, hollering, or if you have, some compasses will have a mirror on them that you can use to flash for people's attention. These are all things that you can do. Self-rescue, it all depends. If you can hear a highway not too far off, then feel free to go down there. You can figure out how to get back to your car from there. But most importantly, just trust your compass as you're out in the woods. The compass isn't going to be wrong. It's going to be you saying, no, that's not right. That's not east. I'm not heading in that direction. Just make sure that you keep that in mind, and that's why it's important to build that skill up before you head out in the woods, because it's pretty easy when you're out on the trail to start second guessing yourself. So just make sure that you're really comfortable with your navigational skills.
Yeah, a lot of this goes back to that planning ahead and preparing, knowing what you're getting into, really studying that map before you go anywhere, and knowing what's north, south, east, and west of you. If you do get in trouble, you know, what's a good exit strategy. And, you know, some people just drive themselves crazy walking in circles when they get lost. At some point, you just have to hunker down, knowing that you left your itinerary with somebody and help is going to be on the way.
Yeah, and really, the most important thing is just stay calm, because you'll figure it out. If you panic, you'll run into some more problems. All right, and injuries. Oh boy, injuries. They're no good. So, as you're out on the trail, your feet are going to get a little torn up, your legs are going to get sore, you're going to have all sorts of blisters and this and that, and that's all fairly minor stuff. It can slow your pace down a little bit. But you want to keep an eye on those things, just make sure you're not getting anything infected. It's not getting worse. That's why it's important to know basic first aid, carry a little kit. This is something that, again, as you're getting more experience, you're going to know what you're going to want to bring with you. You don't need to bring one of those giant first aid kits that we carry in the Ranger vehicles. It's a little heavy. But you can bring the essentials with you, something to disinfect a wound, some kind of bandages, just like moleskin for any blisters you might get on your feet, and you can go from there. If it's a serious enough injury, you have to go and get help. So that's when you're going to have to maybe backtrack to where your car was so you can alert someone to come help you. If your partner breaks their leg, they're obviously not going to be walking out with you, so you might have to leave a person behind, make sure they're well supplied, go get help, and the Rangers are going to come and get you. Somebody's going to come and get you.
Yeah, I think you just have to be realistic here. There's only so much trouble we can really get into in the mid-Atlantic states here. You're pretty close to help at most points. We don't have any real deep wilderness areas, so, you know, be sure to carry that basic stuff. You're probably going to get blisters. You want stuff to treat that. But, you know, as far as knowing how to put your leg in traction and things like that, you're probably not going to get into that wilderness first responding. If something major happens like that, you know, someone's going to go out and really get help to come in. And that's kind of the nice thing is if you're really getting into backpacking around here, you can afford to make some mistakes in the east because you're not too far from help. So most of what I carry, this is my toiletry and my medical kit when I go out. But I'm not prepared for a major emergency. If I get into a major emergency, I know help's going to be coming my way. So I have things to cut to deal with minor cuts and blisters, stuff like that is what you really want to supply on. Otherwise, you start weighing yourself down with a lot of excessive things for medical emergencies you're probably not going to get into.
Yeah.
But, you know, you have to appease your mind.
Yeah, you don't need to bring the jaws of life with you.
Yeah.
By the way, this is like the worst backpacking trip ever. Like, everyone got injured. Don't walk across the icy bridge, folks. So with that, get out on the trail, go enjoy it. Nate and I scared up some pretty easy trails to get out and start backpacking on. I've been out on the Pincho Trail, the Thunder Swamp Trail. Pincho Trail would be my go-to for an easy first hike. It's maybe about an hour and a half from here.
It's like Gettysburg, right?
I think it's more in the Allentown area. I could be wrong. But yeah, but we have, you can Google it and get directions to it. It's pretty flat. There's plenty of water. I think it's maybe like a 12-mile loop, and it's really scenic. It's a beautiful trail. The Thunder Swamp Trail, that's in the Poconos, in the East Stroudsburg area around there. It's a little rockier. The water's a little more scarce, but it's still a pretty easy hike to start off with.
Back at the beginning of this presentation, we had a slide that had the map of Pennsylvania and had a bunch of trails on there with numbers. That map was from the York Hiking Club's website, which I thought it was a nice website with the map, because below that map, then on the website, they have all those trails listed. And it kind of gives you a good idea of some of the different longer trails in the state, locally, that you could make a nice backpacking trip out of. But Appalachian Trail, you know, Port Clinton's not much more than an hour away. So there's a nice hunk of trail to get started
Yeah,
too.
Pinnacle. That's a good hike.
Yeah, I mean, it's some rugged terrain up there, but the nice thing about the Appalachian Trail, if you're getting started, is it is a well-established trail. There are gonna be shelters there. There's great guidebooks, maps, data books, so water, all that stuff's gonna be easy to find. Then you can kind of build yourself up for those more challenging trails that aren't marked as well, that don't have as many people, trails where you're gonna be out there a little more on your own.
Yeah, one thing that I like to do is if I'm getting back in shape or whatever to go backpacking, I'll pick a loop trail because it just makes sense. If you're doing a linear trail, you hike out X number of miles, you gotta hike back X number of miles. The loop trail, and I've done this in the past, I actually did this Thunder Swamp Trail when I got stuck in a thunderstorm, is you can bisect the trail and head back to your parking lot where you parked your vehicle. It just makes things a lot easier. You don't have to worry about navigation quite so much because you're just gonna be like a hamster in the wheel. You're gonna be going around that thing. So
Yeah.
that's something I would recommend doing for your first hike.
And Horseshoe Trail around French Creek area. Nice thing around French Creek, if you're really just getting into it and you don't feel comfortable maybe setting up your tent out in the woods, is, you know, you could hike into French Creek State Park on the Horseshoe Trail and then use one of their established campgrounds where you're gonna have restrooms provided, and, you know, there's gonna be help really nearby if you need it. So that might be a nice way to take baby steps into it too. And it's a real nice area up there around French Creek State Park, and you have Hopewell Furnace, and just real nice area, pretty easy terrain, good place to get started.
Yeah.
Where's the Elk Trail?
Oh, I forget where that is. I think it's out west somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, it's maybe Center County area, I think, if I remember correctly. But that was a short loop. I think it was maybe 15-mile loop in elk country. So if you go there, I think in the fall you can hear the elks bugling. It looks like a good hike. I have not done it personally.
I'm from northern central Pennsylvania, so I'm a little more familiar with the trails up there, like Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, Pine Creek Gorge, have like the West Rim Trail up there, Mid-State Trail, Black Forest Trail. A lot of good trails up there, but definitely steeper, a little harder terrain. But I think once you get some miles under your belt, it's kind of nice to head up there. It's kind of bigger country, more wilderness.
Does anybody else have any other questions? All right, great. So Warwick County Park is a great place for you to do your shakedown hike. So come out. We got trail maps here. Lee's got some Leave No Trace stuff, and we have some more of our programs here. So feel free to come up and take a look.
Is that out
Thank
off
you.
Route 23?
Yep.
I think yes, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.